expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. Congress passed a budget agreement on New Year's Day to keep America from falling off the so-called fiscal cliff. The deal called for higher taxes on the wealthy and would raise roughly $600 billion in new revenues over the next 10 years. But this was a compromise emergency agreement, and a battle looms in Congress to put together a permanent package that deals with America's fiscal future. It's a complex issue, but a vital one. Democrats and Republicans are drawing battle lines as the negotiations begin. We have an MBA professor from the Monroe College King Graduate School with us tonight to help us determine what might be best for the country, and we'll also be joined by Congressman Eliot Engel on the phone. He is in Washington. If you'd like to weigh in with your questions or comments, please join us at 718-960-7241, or you can email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. So for Here and Now, in the studio from Monroe's King Graduate School, it's Professor Dev Rawana. Professor Rawana, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
Appreciate having you with us. And also the Congressman from the 17th Congressional District, from Washington, it's Eliot Engel. Good evening, Congressman Engel. How are you?
I'm fine, Gary. Good to be with you. The new congressional number is 16.
16. I guess my math is all off tonight, but it better be good because we're talking fiscal issues. Let's start with Professor Rawana here in our studio. Congress passed the bill. It increases taxes on Americans earning more than $450,000, raising their capital gains and dividend and real estate taxes. Does that preclude us from getting a good deal through the negotiations with this Congress, or does it lock up certain considerations that might have been better solved if we had dealt with the whole package in the first place?
I believe it's a comprehensive approach to this problem of tax increases. First, we need to have a target. We need to have a goal. What is it are we negotiating about? Taxes are good, but it has to be for a purpose. If we raise revenue from one sector of the economy without considering the impact on the other sector, we will have the lose of sight of the comprehensive macro problem. Mm-hmm. So it's good to have an integrated approach to the problem.
When you heard about the deal, did you say, oh good, there was a deal, or did you say, oh my goodness, they only got half of it done and now we still have a big mess to negotiate?
I don't believe it's a deal that is done. It's still in the progress. What they have done is to extend it temporarily. It will be good if we have it done earlier, but postponing it is sending a signal that what has been done in the past may continue to prevail in the future. Mm-hmm. For example, the Bush tax cut is an extension. If we look at the earliest stimulus package under the Obama administration, it's taken impact. We have seen that unemployment rate is coming down. First, we believe the government spending is not going to be working. So the problem is really a long-term impact, not a short-term focus. So I was not disappointed that it was extended. Mm-hmm. We need to think more and come up with better solutions.
I want you to pretend that our phone caller is not on the phone when I ask you this question. Do you have confidence in the way the political rancor is going that those issues can properly be dealt with, that enough people will take themselves out of it and look at the economy as a whole? Or are you concerned that with the political rancor as it is in Washington right now, we're not going to get where we need to be?
I believe the politicians should come together, Congress and the Obama administration, and look at the economy as our priority and put aside our political differences, because unless the economy grows, there is no pie to share.
I hope Congressman Engel will remember that and tell some of his colleagues the same thing. Congressman, just today, the president made it expressly clear that he wouldn't negotiate on the debt ceiling, or at least allow the Republicans to use that as leverage on spending cuts. Give me some sense, if you can, what the negotiations are like between you and your colleagues in Congress now. Is there a stepping back at all in terms of analyzing the economy, or is it really just everybody rooted in their political dogma?
Well, it's everything, unfortunately. What happened, of course, was that let me just provide a little bit of background because I think it's important. When Bill Clinton left office in 2001, we had record surpluses in this country, and we could have used those surpluses to pay off national debt, to shore up Social Security and Medicare, all the social programs that I believe are really part of the American fiber and so important. And what happened was George W. Bush came in and immediately instituted the Bush tax cuts, mainly for the wealthy, instituted that, which cut back on the surplus and gave us a deficit. We then fought two wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, didn't pay for them, so they were actually fought on a credit card, and that contributed mightily to the deficit. Then we had September 11th and the fight of the war on terror, and that caused a lot of money, and so we saw record surpluses turn into record deficits. So when the Republicans preach fiscal responsibility, I always chuckle because it was under their watch that we went from record surpluses to record deficits. But now we have a problem, and we've got to deal with it, and we're all in it together. And it would be best, I think, if we could sit down and come up with some kind of a grand plan where we would be able to cut spending, raise taxes, and close loopholes, and do all kinds of things to put us on a path where which is sustainable, because it really isn't sustainable. I'll agree with the Republicans on one thing. It's really not sustainable to keep spending more than you're taking in, because then we're leaving a legacy of debt to our children and our grandchildren, and our standard of living will start slipping, and it's really not a good blueprint for the future. The question is, how do you get there? And what's happened with the Republicans in the House, because as you know, Gary, in the Senate, you need very often 60 votes out of the 100 right, to be able to move forward. In the House, it's an absolute majority. And so the Republicans have a majority. They had it in the last Congress. They have a majority again in this Congress. It's a slightly smaller majority, but it's still a majority. And so in essence, they can make decisions, and the Democrats really cannot stop it. Only in the Senate can it be stopped. And so what the Republicans, by and large the Tea Party people, have been saying is that the only way to balance the budget is to cut spending. They don't want to see any tax increases, not even for the very rich. They were forced, some of them, to vote for this plan, which raised taxes on people, on couples making over $450,000. But they generally do not want to raise any kind of taxes whatsoever, and they want to cut programs that I think are important to my constituents in the Bronx, like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid, like Pell Grants, education grants for students. These are the programs that are the lifeline of people living and pulling themselves up, and the Republicans don't like these programs, never have, never will, and they would like to see Medicare, for instance, turned into a block grant, and Social Security turned into a voucher program, and those would be terrible things. Well, so all we've and then I'll stop. All we've been doing, and which is what we did, is we passed a bill which basically keeps everything going and the government flowing for another 2 months, and then we're going to again in 2 months look at this, and the Republicans have threatened to use the raising the debt ceiling to block it as a way of preventing anything from getting passed, and using it as blackmail. And the president has rightfully said he's not going to be blackmailed by it. So here we are again. Stay tuned for the last week before the 2 months is up, and then you'll have a repetition of what just happened.
Do you think that the only way to get a deal is to have it forced by time, which is in essence what happened the last time around? Is that the way to force this issue is going to be not through negotiation but through the clock ticking?
Well, I think the clock ticking, as long as you've got people, and I believe the Tea Party Republicans who control the House have an attitude of my way or the highway, you're not going to be able to get a grand deal other than these little deals that lurch forward every few months. And I think that's a shame. It's not good for the country, and it shows a dysfunctional Congress.
That conflicts with the optimism of my studio guests, but I'm going to ask you both the same question now to get into some of the nuts and bolts of the economics of it. Can you balance the budget, and can we get a deal simply by taxing the rich? Because the suggestion has been out there that even if you got the taxes on the rich that the president wants and that the Democrats want, that it's just going to be a drop in the bucket, and you're still not going to be able to balance the budget, and you're still going to have some very serious spending cuts. So first for you, and then our guest in the studio, Congressman, can you balance the budget by taxing the rich?
No, you have to do everything, all of the above. You've got to cut some spending. There's no doubt about that. The question is, where do you cut? You've got to raise some taxes, and you've got to close some loopholes. For instance, Gary, I don't know why we're still giving tax breaks to big oil. They're making record profits, billions and billions and billions of dollars, and we're still giving them huge tax breaks. And there were all kinds of other loopholes that we could close, like the big oil loophole, and we don't do. It's going to, and by the way, it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have to work our way there. What's happening is the deficit has been increasing every year. We've got to stop that. We've got to at least keep it as much as it is, and then in the outlying years, hope to decrease it. But we're not going to go 1 year with deficits and the very next year balancing the budget. It just can't happen.
All right, Professor Wawana, same question for you. Can we balance the budget with taxing the rich? Is this really the biggest issue here? And if we can get that solved, then all of a sudden there's a little more for balancing the budget.
No. Taxing the rich will not solve the problem of a balanced budget approach. The rich is only a portion of the tax base. To tax the rich, we have to more than double the taxes. And it's going to be a so small amount compared to the base that we have to look at other avenues for tax increases. It's not going to work. Balancing the budget requires more than the rich alone. It has to be a comprehensive approach. I agree with Congressman. We have to identify and close loopholes. There are corporations that are not simply individuals that have zero or no taxes on the corporate income. So the rich approach is not the answer.
It's not only individual income tax, but you say on a corporate tax
as well. Yeah.
Now, and how big a part of the pie then are loopholes that Congressman Engel was talking about? Not only for corporations, but for individuals. Many people say that this, the issue is that they can write off so much of it. How much of it is tax rules and regulations?
Well, most of the tax codes need to be revised. They are done when the economy was prospering, when we are now in the decline. These loopholes have to be revisited. Perhaps that's one of the goals of that extension temporarily up to March, to do more research. What is exactly the revenue based? We shall not make decisions on snapshots. We have to do more investigation.
Republicans would have us all believe that the issue is spending. This was the mantra certainly through the political campaign. How much of this problem is created by spending, even spending on social programs, or spending on, certainly we know what a big part of the pie Medicare is.
The biggest
certainly
part.
Military is part of it. How much of this is spending that needs to be cut back? And in essence, what I'm asking is to evaluate their mantra over and over again: spending, spending, spending.
Spending is good, to be honest with you. When we are in recession and the private sector is not responding, it's the government that does the spending, the stimulus. But there is a limit. Government spending shall not be permanent. It shall be temporary. It shall give the private sector not being crowded out. That means if you spend as a public entity, I will not spend as a private individual. So when the economy is in a downslide, it's a good idea to government to spend. And then the in comes in from the private sector. But it appears that we have a prolonged recession. And it appears that spending is an issue now for the current government. We have to address the issue. When will we have enough incentives for the private sector to take off? We cannot continuously.
It's a fascinating analysis that you've presented. Then how do you stimulate the economy so the recession ends, and then you can go on the back end of doing all the things that you would like to do?
Therefore, we have to have built-in mechanism, automatic changes. That is what the fiscal cliff is all about. But it was done long before we have Medicare introduced. Under Bush administration, we have temporary tax cut and Social Security. Now it have to take effect in January 2013. But the economy has taken a different turn. That is why we have some changes and revision to those kind of tax codes. That's what the current administration is arguing. But as an economist, I think everything should be done not on a piecemeal approach, but on a comprehensive level.
Congressman, the president talked today about raising the debt ceiling. You talked earlier about that we fought the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan on a credit card. Raising the debt ceiling and continuing to, pay it forward, as it were, is this the way to go?
Well, the full faith and credit of the United States is something that is even talked about in our Constitution, and many of us, myself included, believe that the president should just invoke the 14th Amendment and say that he's going to move forward to not allow the U.S. to default, that interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and not allow the Republicans to blackmail him. The bottom line is this. The United States, in the history of the Republic, has never defaulted. We're not talking about new spending. We're talking about spending that has already been done and paying the interest on the money that was borrowed to do that spending. So we're not talking about new spending. We're talking about fulfilling our obligations on spending that we have already done. It would be unconscionable for default on the government's part. We saw when the last fight to raise the debt ceiling went to the very, very end, Standard & Poor's downgraded the United States economy and hurt us very badly. We would have more of this happening again if we would default. So Vice President Biden came to a Democratic caucus when we were going over the plan on New Year's Day, and said that the president is not going to be blackmailed into doing things because the Republicans are threatening to default and threatening to shut the government down.
Well, that was definitely going to be my next question. Is that a real threat? Do you think they would actually do that? In essence, for folks who aren't aware of what that means, in essence, not paying its bills. So people in the military, other government employees, you wouldn't get your Social Security check for a period of time. Is that a real threat? And is the president? It's easy to say I won't be blackmailed. On the other hand, that would be, I'm guessing, very devastating to our economy.
Well, it would be. It could send us back into a recession. I mean, what happens is you have to go back and look at the Republican conference in the House. You may remember that a few weeks ago, when the Speaker John Boehner walked out of the negotiations with the White House and said he was proceeding to Plan B, which was a plan that he brought before his own Republican conference, which they rejected. And so then he didn't know what to do. What's going on, and you saw when he was, when we had the vote for Speaker, he barely got a little bit over a majority to become elected Speaker because he had 9 or 10 Republicans not voting for him. He's got a tiger by the tail, and you have his caucus thinking that he wants to compromise with the White House and that he's too moderate. You've got enough people who don't want any kind of compromise, who are threatening to block anything that he could do. Now, traditionally, with Republican speakers, they have wanted, you need 218 votes to make a majority in the House of Representatives. They have about 235 Republicans right now, and there are 234 Republicans and 201 Democrats. And so they want to make the 218, which is the majority, out of their 235 or 234, and which means, you know, if you do the math, you have 16, 17, 18 people could actually block it.
And those are really the people, ultimately, if you do the kind of analysis you just presented, that ultimately will make the determination of the way that this goes.
Well, yes, but then the Speaker can turn around and agree to do what he did just in the recent crisis on New Year's Day, is you had a majority of Republicans vote no, but there were enough Republicans, 50 or 60 out of the 230, who voted yes, added on to the Democrats, who virtually all voted yes, to make a majority. And the question will be, will the Speaker allow that to happen again, or will he now insist that he did it once and he was almost dethroned? And, you know, Hurricane Sandy and the postponement of the aid for Hurricane Sandy played in with all of this because he was afraid to force his conference to vote for aid for Hurricane Sandy right after he forced his conference to swallow and go along with the agreement that was made with Obama.
Right, and so a lot of this, Congressman, will depend, of course, on the president's political skill, which he showed, I think, very clearly as we got up to New Year's Day. I want to ask Professor Rawana about another aspect of this whole thing and how it affects individual Americans. Those of us who looked at our paychecks after January 1st saw that, in fact, there was an increase in the payroll taxes. And so even though this budget deal was hailed, the majority of Americans looked at our paychecks and said, wait a minute, I thought we did better. In fact, I got a smaller paycheck. Is that a big concern long-term for you? And should Americans say, well, you know what, there was something kind of nasty hidden in this deal that everybody hailed as a big victory?
Well, to be honest with you, the social tax, it's 6.2% all the time, and it was temporarily reduced to 4.2%, and now it goes back to its normal level. But what most of us don't like is that reduction in our paycheck.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So middle Americans would say, gee whiz, that's nice that you raised the tax, but because it was a rush deal, they didn't get to address this payroll tax issue.
That's correct, and it has long-term implications. People who will do the normal mainstream working and to avoid the taxes, they perhaps will go underground. They will go under the table to earn their income because the unemployment rate is not that impressive right now.
Right.
And
but not impressive.
That's correct. And if we can save a buck by not putting myself on the payroll, I will avoid it.
Let me get to the telephones. I think it's Sylvan from Riverdale is calling in. Welcome to Bronx Talk. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you. Yes, I'm calling from Riverdale. I know Elliot Engel for a long time. Been in a couple of meetings. It's kind of funny how these senators and congressmen, they say they want to help the debt. Meanwhile, they gave themselves very, very hefty pay increases. I'm a business owner. I had to lay off 18 employees out of 19. I'm self-employed, and I don't see any future in hiring anybody else with payroll tax. Meanwhile, they say no new taxes. The president said, look at the Triborough Bridge, the Whitestone Bridge, what they did with the tolls. They're screwing the people around by saying we're going to lower the taxes, but they increased everything else around us.
The
cost of living in New York City is ridiculous. Right. It really is. Meanwhile, I don't see any of these policies. I'm a disabled veteran, and I have to hear about them saying they're going to cut veterans. I'm 65 years old. They talk about cutting Social Security. Why isn't the Congress cutting their pay? Why did Pelosi spend so much money from the government going back and forth to California and Washington? And why did the president's wife spend $1.25 billion that could have built a hospital in the poor areas?
Sylvan, let me before we run out of time, thank you for your call. Let me, Congressman Engel, you heard the voice of an everyday Bronxite telling you what he thinks. I'm sure it's the kind of thing you've heard before. What's your reaction?
A Bronxite who has said one inaccurate thing after another. Congress hasn't had a pay raise in about 4 or 5 years. Congress has cut any kind of pay raise. And when you're talking about raising the tolls, I agree with him. Raising the tolls are irksome, but it's not what Congress does. It's not done on a federal level. It's done on a city and state level. So he's mixing up his levels of government. Mm-hmm. And let me say, as far as the payroll tax goes, look, nobody wants to pay more taxes, but we need to have Social Security. The payroll tax pays for Social Security. We can't have it both ways. We can't say we don't want to pay for Social Security and we want Social Security. The payroll tax was supposed to be the cut was a temporary cut to stimulate the economy for a year. It was extended a second year. It was never supposed to be permanent, and so I think it's important to shore up Social Security. While nobody wants to pay any taxes, we need to have programs, and in order to have them, we need to pay for them. So it's a matter of sensible programs. As far as Mrs. Obama and Pelosi, what the caller said is totally inaccurate. Okay. Mrs. Obama not spending $1 billion, and Nancy Pelosi went back and forth to her district in California the way every member of Congress would go back. She was the speaker at the time, so she had her own plane. There were
Congressman, we're just about out of time. We thank you for your time, and I know that when we invite you, you'll come back, and we appreciate the dialogue.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Professor Rowana will give you the final word. How do you see this playing out? Do you think there will be a deal, or do you think ultimately we'll get what the Republicans are threatening? We'll have a showdown of some sort right at the 11th or 12th hour once again.
I think there will be a deal. They're not credible.
Those threats?
Those threats are not credible. We have obligations to meet. Whether it's either government, those obligations must be met. Secondly, the national debt is not an issue. It's a legal issue. Congress can either raise it or reduce it. But the focus in this negotiation is the unemployment rate. We should really focus on growth of the economy. And then we take all our tax codes and monitor them towards that focus.
Boy, you've just launched a whole new show that we could do right at the end. So how do you stimulate the economy so that the unemployment rate goes up?
First, we focus on growth.
Very quick.
GDP must go up. Unemployment is a residual. Unemployment will automatically be resolved once we grow.
Professor Dev Rowana, we're going to have you back because there's plenty more to talk about from the King Graduate School at Monroe College. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary, for inviting me to the show.
Folks, if you do have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@hotmail.com or make a comment on our Facebook page, and we read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of the show are available at bronxnet.org. Click Bronx Talk on the bottom right-hand navigation bar. Also, you can become a fan of us on Facebook. Next week, we go to state issues. We'll talk about the governor's State of the State address, including discussion of gun control and the future of New York's energy production, with representatives from both state houses. Michael Benedetto will join us from the Assembly side, and Senators Ruth Hassel Thompson and Jose M. Serrano will be calling in from Albany. That's next Monday night. Thanks to our producer, Jane Folloro. Our director is Shirley Arrieta. And to studio assistant, Dina, and to all the thousands of folks around us, and to you, good night.